All right, we're live. What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We are going to be just like kind of recapping the UFC 304 card. And for the card being what it was, and you could tell Dana White was obviously not thrilled with everything, right? He was a little bit pissed off afterwards, it seemed like, crowning Belal the champion, who's like, man, the king of decisions. And Leon actually has a lot of decisions as well. But yeah, he just saying that he's never going to increase the fight night bonuses again, because nobody fought any harder, all the stuff. And then there's all the debate about what time it all started. So for this card supposedly being boring, there certainly seems to be a lot to talk about, right? And let's run through the prelims real quick. We'll talk about some things along the way, and then we'll get into the results of some of these bigger fights. But actually, before we jump into any of that, just want to mention, I did see that the UFC just announced a big middleweight fight between I want to say Curtis Blaydes. God, Chris Curtis and Kevin Holland, right? They'll be in Salt Lake City at UFC 307. So they're going to join that slate there. So that's a pretty good fight. Yeah, so far, Movsar Evloev versus Aljamain Sterling's on that card. Cesar Almeida versus Eor Pateria. Yasmin Lucindo versus Marina Rodriguez. So that card's starting to shape up. But that's a big fight there. So, yeah. That got announced, but let's run through the prelims real quick here. Let's get back on track. Man, all I'm doing is I'm in a web browser. I'm loading like MMA Junkie, and my computer is just crawling, man. It's a few years old. Maybe I need a new one. But anyway, we start off. Sean O'Bannon picked up a split decision victory over Alice Ardalian. I can't pronounce. I'm going to fuck the names up, guys. I always do. But yeah, close fight. Shauna struggled a little bit early on, but really got the striking going later on in the fight and really like pulled herself away from Alice. Mick Parkin picked up a big knockout victory over Lucas Brzeski. Man, this was a good fight, and Brzeski was fighting. He was fighting pretty well, but it just felt like every time he reached out and tried to touch Mick Parkin, he was like overextending himself a little bit. And man, it just felt like Parkin was a little bit tighter, a little bit more controlled. Things were more crisp. His footwork was more in line. He wasn't lunging at things, right? He wasn't trying to get there like with his feet. I don't know. He just wasn't taking all these big chances, and it just felt like that knockout was inevitable. But he picked it up in the first round, so that's a big win for the heavyweight. Next, we get two arm triangles in a row. Sam Patterson taps out Kiefer Crosby in round one, and Modestas Bukakas picks up an arm triangle in round three after a pretty entertaining fight, really, against Marcin Prachnio. I mean, don't get me wrong. I felt like Bukakas was out in front for the most part, but it was an entertaining fight, and Prachnio had his moments. Obon Elliott picked up a big victory over Preston Parsons. And then we get to probably one of the most interesting just stories and fights on the entire card, in Muhammad Mokaev versus Manel Kape. There's all this drama and build up leading up to the fight. Mokaev sucker punched Manel Kape, right? Over, I don't even know, right? Like they're arguing about all these different things. Mokaev seems to be causing all these problems, and he's known as well for having a lot of boring fights. And you got to realize, like, people are almost acting surprised that they cut Mokaev. The UFC traded away Demetrius Johnson, the best flyweight in MMA history, to one for Ben Askren, right? I mean, like, they're not going to blink twice at cutting a boring flyweight, especially a guy who's causing. By the way, I want to point this out too regarding all this Muhammad Mokaev versus Manel Kape stuff. Even as they're approaching the octagon, right, the energy and the build up to this is so high that Mokaev is running over, trying to get at Kape during the fight, or during the announcements and everything, basically, when they're entering the cage, and security has to stand there all the way through Bruce Buffer announcing everything, right? So security stays in the cage the entire time. And it feels like there's all this energy, and then the fight starts and it all dies instantly. And they're just like feeling each other out essentially for 15 minutes, it feels like. I mean, there were some moments in the fight where they exchanged and stuff. And it wasn't a terrible fight, to be honest with you. And I thought it was a little bit closer than the 30-27 the one judge gave it credit for. But my point is just, if all of that buildup happens, you've got the perfect story. I mean, look at how the UFC leveraged Conor McGregor and Habib, with Conor throwing the trolley and everything. Look at how they leveraged that in the promo. You had all the buildup. The UFC will take advantage of those negative, quote unquote, like things that happen, that negative press, and they'll use it to build up the fight. You had all the tools at your disposal to go out and have a barn burner and stay on the roster, and man, it just didn't develop that way. So it's like it shows you kind of how much they really either dislike working with Mikhaev or just are not interested in him becoming the champion at all. And they probably look at him and think, yeah, he might win the belt, and if he does, it's going to be terrible. It might be the death of the flyweight division is maybe what they're thinking. Seriously. I mean, no one's getting excited for his fights. And if you're willing to cut somebody or trade somebody like Demetrius Johnson, who had amazing fights and with exemplary technique, man, you're going to be willing to get rid of Mikhaev, who's this challenger, and he's young. He's like 23 years old. He has potential to go win the belt. And when he does, if you just get a decision machine on your hands and somebody who just does enough to win, it's a business. And I think the UFC sees it going down that road a little bit, and they want to avoid that. They want to keep the title picture at 125 a little bit more interesting and maybe try to keep the division alive. I don't know. I'm just playing like devil's advocate here, but people seem so surprised by that. And to me, I was kind of like, it kind of makes sense. His contract's up. He caused all this drama and stuff beforehand and then didn't even deliver on fight night. Like I said, if they go out and have a barn burner, I think he turns his career around. I think the UFC is like, yeah, fuck it, we're re-signing him. And then they would use all that. You know what I mean? I'm just saying, it goes to show how much they must really not enjoy working with Muhammad Mikhaev. All right, moving on up the card. Let's see. We had Jake Hadley. He picked up a pretty sound victory over Calvin Loughran. Bruna Brasil beat up on Molly McCann. I think that was a surprise to a lot of people. Really just a lot cleaner in the striking department. Nathaniel Wood had a nearly flawless performance against Daniel Pineda, right? Just quick with everything, so sharp, so far ahead of Pineda in all the exchanges until that third round when Pineda was able to get on top and kind of put Wood on his back for the entirety of the round. I mean, Wood never really even worked his way back up. So that's definitely a hole that he needs to close up if he wants to keep working his way through the rankings and fighting the division's elite. But this was a good fight, and overall through the first two rounds, I mean, damn, Nathaniel Wood looked like a world beater. So, yeah, some things to clean up. Like I said, getting back to the feet, maybe threatening with submissions and stuff to just like work your way back up, even if you're not trying to really land them. But he's got to do something to get off his back. Arnold Allen versus Giga Chikadze. This was a good fight, right? And Giga surprised me starting off in the first round when things started to heat up a little bit and Giga started landing. I was concerned that Allen wasn't going to be able to find him. But overall, just the pressure and the consistency and just the pace of Arnold Allen caught up to Giga, and Allen was able to pull off the victory here. Allen is good, man. And Giga, like I said, the way the round started off, the first round, I thought it was going to be more of a problem for Allen, but Allen was able to solve the puzzle and just, man, aggressiveness pays off. And the same is true in this next fight between Rodriguez and Leroy Duncan. I thought breaking this fight down, that Rodriguez was probably going to have a hard time getting at Leroy Duncan and closing that distance because Duncan's so accurate and he has so much range with those kicks. He spins, right? I thought that, and look, Rodriguez can box. He did way better in close range. He was able to be aggressive and put it on him, but I thought that Leroy Duncan would have a field day in the center of the octagon. And man, Rodriguez just kind of smothered him, right? Just smothered him and took away all that offense, outboxed him in close, and just really beat Leroy Duncan up over the course of 3 rounds. And that was a great win for Gregory Rodriguez. Yeah, very impressive. Odds were pretty close going into this one, but I just thought that kind of like karate stance would match up favorably in this one, and man, was I wrong. Rodriguez kind of walked through Leroy Duncan, so great performance. All right, Patty the Batty picked up a triangle victory over Bobby Green, and Bobby Green had never been submitted before, and one thing that I pointed out in the build-up to this fight that I think is important is the kicks of Patty Pimblett, and really the kicks. I did a breakdown on this one if you guys go back and check it out on the channel, but Patty Pimblett he hits like an inside leg kick on Bobby Green that kind of knocks his balance off, and Bobby tries to time that kick, and he's off a little bit, right, to get it on a takedown entry. Patty stuffs it, jumps a guillotine, throws his leg up over, gets the diamond, and then finishes a triangle. And broke his arm too. And you know what sucks about that I keep calling him Bobby, for King Green, is you're out, right? Like I think he was out right before he got rolled through. And then when he got rolled through, your arm is just, your arm is already trapped, right? Like it's smashed like this up against your face. It's straightened out. There's not much you can do to defend. But at least if you're conscious, you could fucking tap because you realize you're fucked. When you're unconscious, though, man, your arm's exposed like this. Patty just grabs a hold of it, and it looked like he broke it. And I think he did say that he broke it in an interview afterwards. So, man, imagine you're in a stadium full of all these people. You get passed out. And then while you're passed out, you get your arm broken. So you don't even know what happens. And then you wake up and you're like, I don't know if you guys have ever gone out. I've gone out 3 times in my jiu-jitsu career, all in the training room, right? And every time you kind of like wake up, your consciousness starts funneling back in and you're like, what happened? And then you slowly piece it back together, right? You feel kind of lightheaded at first and then things start coming back to you. It's not like getting knocked out, right? Like, but imagine you're like, fuck, I remember I was caught in that triangle. And then you're like, my arm snapped. I must have got my arm broken. During that time, I didn't remember. You just wake up with a fucking broken arm. That would blow. That would be rough to deal with. But anyway, a big performance from Patty. And again, going back to the kicks and stuff, Aljamain Sterling, you can afford to kick when you're a really good grappler. And most guys are not going to want to go to the ground with Sterling, even if it means taking him down and being on top, because his jiu-jitsu is so high level and God forbid the guy gets to your back. But because of that, he's able to implement kicks so effectively, right? And Patty is a big, long, taller guy for the division. Like he was bigger than Bobby Green, right? When you throw kicks, you can reach out and touch guys at a range where they can't quite hit you, especially when you're tall. It compounds that problem. So I feel like if Patty can avoid, because don't get me wrong, he's a good boxer, right? Like he's an okay boxer, but he leaves his chin hanging up and he has a lot of holes defensively. And when you start fighting guys who are really precise and can crack, that's going to be a problem. And to be a champion, to get to that level, we saw this with Belal Muhammad, you have to be multifaceted in your approach most of the time, right? Like there are exceptions out there. Like if you look at Alex Pereira, he's probably an exception. We haven't seen a lot from him on the ground, or we haven't seen him really go against a guy who is high level on the ground, right? But he's just effective because he's so fucking good in that one area. But overall, especially at a division like 155, I feel like you have to find a multifaceted approach. You can't rely on just getting the guy to the ground. But for Patty, an avenue to get there might be through the kicks. It can help him set up his takedowns, or maybe he can bait guys into taking him down, right? It's a good strategy for him to start adding into his game. And as we start to see more layers like that get added into Patty's game and he executes them in the fights, that's when we start seeing him climb up the rankings. I still think that Patty needs to work his way up slow. I don't want to see too big of a leap for him next. I would, if I was managing him, I would say we're going to work up. What are the rankings at 155 look like? Let's see. Let me pull them up. Okay, so Bobby was ranked, 15 going into that fight? It looks like they haven't been updated yet. Bobby was ranked 15, so Patty's going to crack the top 15, which means your fights from here on out, man, they don't get easy, right? Like you don't get any gimmies anymore. Not that King Green was a gimme, he was not. But now that you've cracked that top 15, every matchup that you have from now on is going to be difficult. I mean, what about a guy like Dos Anjos? If I'm looking at Jalen Turner, I don't know. That's a scary fight a little bit. He's so fucking sharp on the feet. But this is what I mean. Saint Denis, Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker's maybe a matchup. Is Dan Hooker booked to fight? But my point is just the path does not get easier for Patty Pimblett from here on out. So he's going to have to pick his opponents intelligently and try to pick opponents that he feels like he can like maybe funnel his way to an advantage in those fights, right? And hopefully add skills slowly one at a time to deal with these different sorts of problems that you encounter in the top 15. We'll see. I still think the future is bright for Patty. His ground game is so fucking good. And that's what I mean. If you look at the triangle and just his understanding of the angle and how he scooped under the leg, just use that to sweep Bobby through. And also just the constant Kazushi, right? Or off balancing of Bobby Green. Every time he would lock up the fucking diamond, he would get to his side. Like even when he was in the guillotine, like you don't play flat off your back in jiu-jitsu. It's hard. It's hard to be mobile there. You want to play like off the points of your hip. And that a lot of the times involves getting to your side. So if you notice, whether he's in the guillotine with Bobby Green, right? He's always on his side, or whether he throws up the diamond, he's constantly turning his knees down towards the mat, right? And not letting Bobby stack up into him. So he understands the importance of all that. And then just the details on the triangle finish. It's not this classic triangle where you can see a ton of the guy's shoulder and it's a tight ass fucking triangle. Like I said, Bobby's arm is compressed, his shoulder's blocking off this carotid, the crease of the knees around the other carotid, cutting off circulation. It's tight. That's a tight fucking triangle. That's high level jiu-jitsu. That's stuff that you don't see out of a lot of guys who are really good grapplers in the UFC. You saw that from Paddy Pimblett. Also, just like the way he's not really inverting, but staying up elevated on his shoulders while he's finishing the triangle. Like I said, he's never flat on his back. He's so dangerous everywhere on the ground that he can afford like a kick-heavy style, and Aljamain Sterling rode that shit to a title. So if Paddy, like I said, if he can just keep adding things, I think there's a lot of hope for Paddy Pimblett. He's fucking good. All right. Next, Tom Aspinall knocks out Curtis Blaydes in round 1 in a minute flat. And in my opinion, a little bit of an early stoppage, but I'm okay with it because it didn't feel like Curtis was getting up from there, right? Like, I guess in terms of the guy going out cold, it's early, obviously, right? And like I am overall, for the most part, I know like it's like brutal, whatever, but I'm a fan of finality. And I would have liked to have seen Curtis had a chance to just like work his way back up, even if he can start to like, build up to his hands and feet and start to get against, I don't know, something. But the way that Aspinall just kind of jumped on him after he hit him with that jab, it didn't feel like that was going to happen. So I thought I was okay with it, right? Maybe a little early, but I was okay with it. And Tom Aspinall is a problem, right? He's knocked out the most dangerous knockout artist in the heavyweight division right now in Sergey Pavlovich, and he just cleaned up Curtis Blaydes, who's probably the biggest threat other than John Jones in the entire division. And speaking of John, now we've got this massive problem that I knew would occur when you start handing out interim belts, right? But John is slated to fight Stipe in November, right? That's what it seems like is going to happen. And it feels like the fight that should be happening is obviously John Jones versus Aspinall. But John, whether there one of two outcomes, I think. John goes into the Stipe fight, 3 outcomes, I guess. Stipe could win. If John beats Stipe, though, he could ride off into the sunset, retire, and go down as probably the greatest fighter of all time. Essentially undefeated. He might even end up undefeated if they somehow overturn his loss because of this new noon to 6 elbow rule. Or he fights Tom Aspinall. And I know that Tom is itching to get the fight, but if I'm John Jones and I'm coming off shoulder surgery and I know that Aspinall is waiting in the wings, I want this Stipe fight as a tune-up fight. There's no way I'm fighting Aspinall first. He's too dangerous. He's too fast. There's too many things going on. I want to get my feet in the octagon against a guy who I feel like I have a good chance to beat. And really, I mean, it's going to suck for Aspinall because he's going to have to sit between now and November. He's going to have to wait for the outcome of John Jones versus Stipe Miocic, right? And once that outcome is played out, he's going to have to hope that neither of those guys get injured, right? And he's going to honestly, I mean, if Stipe beats John, then Stipe would all of a sudden, everybody would be talking about Stipe. So Aspinall versus Stipe is still a huge fight, right? But just being honest, it feels like John's going to win. And I think that if John is, say what you want about him, he should have been more active. He's lost time in the octagon because of all of this activity outside, blah, blah, blah. But John has always handled his career intelligently, right? He's always handled his career intelligently, and that's part of the reason he's undefeated. He's going to fight Stipe. He's going to use that as a tune-up fight. And then I think he's going to fight Aspinall. I think his pride will want to fight Aspinall and just find out. I really do. I don't think that John's like afraid of anyone. I don't. I think that and the one unanswered question, here's the thing with Aspinall, is that Aspinall is very well-rounded. I was going to say the one thing we haven't seen John truly have to face in his career is a power puncher. Never fought Anthony Johnson, right? Never had to fight Rumble. And now that he's gone up to heavyweight, he fought more of a guy who is a little bit more precise, I would say, in Cyril Gahn, more of a tactician, more of a technician, just out-wrestled him. And now he's going to be going up against an older Stipe Miocic, right? So he's gone his whole career without fighting a guy who has real one-punch knockout power. Granted, DC knocked out Stipe, but that was a heavyweight. DC didn't really demonstrate that kind of one-punch KO power at 205. So Aspinall can do that, though. Aspinall can legitimately hurt you and knock you out with one shot. We just saw him hurt Blaydes with a jab. He has the ability to put you on the ground. And if you watch his fights, he's got really good timing on his takedowns. Aspinall's well-rounded. That's a good fight for John. And to me, this is how it honestly feels. You get people debating Tom Aspinall is the real champion. John Jones is the real champion. In my opinion, it's John fucking Jones. Nobody is the champion until they beat John Jones. Aspinall has been doing great. He's been on a great run, but he's fought everybody but John. And you know what I mean? That's just, to me, that's my personal opinion. John Jones right now is the heavyweight champ, and Aspinall is this up-and-coming contender that's been blitzing through everybody. Now, granted, he's done it I understand he's done it with the interim title, but when John Jones is in the picture, you never sleep on John. John is the greatest, right? And if Aspinall can go out and beat him, it'll be super impressive. But John has to handle his business against Stipe first, even though it feels like John should be fighting Aspinall next. But again, keep in mind the shoulder surgery. He's going to want to take his time. John's going to fight Stipe, and then he's going to have to make a decision about whether to retire or whether to fight Aspinall. If I'm Aspinall too, I'm not fighting Alex Pereira to defend the interim. I'm not doing any of that shit. I'm sitting out and waiting for the result of John Jones versus Stipe. I'm letting it build. I'm taking all this time to get ready for him, and then I'm fighting him as soon as I can if he beats Stipe. I think that's the game plan. I think that's how it's going to play out. I do think John will fight Tom, especially because he never, like with Ngannou leaving, right? I think going in and fighting Tom will validate a lot of things because Cyril Gane was never really, he had a lot of hope and a lot of promise, but the way John beat him kind of left the taste in people's mouth like, was he as good as we thought? And Aspinall is as good as we think. So if John can do that to him, it'd be like, holy fuck. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I think it's going to play out. John fights Stipe for a quote-unquote warm-up fight, and then he's going to defend against Aspinall sometime in 2025. All right, new welterweight champion, Belal, remember the name Muhammad, just beats up Leon Edwards. And I said this I picked Leon to win the fight. I thought Leon was going to win overall. But you have to give Belal credit, and I couldn't believe the odds were stacked so heavily in favor of Leon. But Belal, we talked earlier about how Paddy needs to develop a few more weapons, be more multifaceted. Belal is multifaceted. He can fight moving backwards. He can fight moving forward. He has good boxing, good wrestling, right? He's comfortable in all these different scenarios. He has a lot of fights under his belt. He's a veteran. He's fought the division's elite. Belal Muhammad is well fucking rounded, and he just went out and put it on Leon Edwards. And I think that Edwards he's a guy who relies a lot on feints and setting things up and keeping you at a distance. And he's a sniper, right? And in order to be a sniper at a very high level, you have to set guys up and get them freezing a little bit with your feints and maybe getting them looking at something here and then hitting them with something here. And Belal just never gave Leon a chance to get going on the feet. He got in his face right off the bat and he let his hands go. And I think it surprised Leon, not only how active Belal was, but how many punches he was willing to throw, right? And the speed. I think the speed of Belal threw him off a little bit. I thought Leon thought he was going to have a big advantage there, and Belal just came forward and put it on him. Just got in his face and boxed him, right? And then that opened up the threat of the takedown. And once Belal was getting in so deep on the hips of Leon Edwards. It was like, you knew as soon as he shot, he was going to be able to take him down on that attempt. That's how deep he was driving in. I mean, like running up against the cage, hands locked together underneath the butt and just picking him up and dumping him over and over. I mean, he walked through him. And now you get into the debate too, like Leon said after, he's like, I felt tired, all this. And Belal had to go through all that stuff, right? Obviously too. I think when you hear stuff like that from Leon, that's not an excuse. I think he's just telling you how his body responded to the situation. And maybe in an odd way admitting like, yeah, Belal, obviously he didn't have that same problem that I did, right? Like I think he's just trying to be honest with you about how he felt during the fight. And Leon has one of the more interesting demeanors in the UFC because him and Rose, they both look like they don't want to be in there while they're fighting, right? But then you look at how he finished out the fifth round in this fight. I mean, granted, it was too little too late, but he got up and was landing those big elbows on Belal, cut him open, ended the fight on top. Like, you can't deny Leon Edwards' willpower. He just like, I don't know if that's just the expression he wears on his face, if he just typically has, I don't know. I'm not in the gym with the fucking guy. He might just be a guy who has bad body language, but that's not really a reflection of what's going on inside his mind, right? if you watch him at press conferences and stuff, he is a little bit more like, I wouldn't say awkward on the mic, but he's not really like the best on the mic. Like, I don't know. I just feel like that's kind of his demeanor and how he fights, right? And yeah, I don't know. But Belal Muhammad, new undisputed champion, and undisputed without a doubt. Also, you did get a glimpse, though, and in the first fight, Leon was able to hurt Belal on the feet, and Leon was kind of controlling the clinch exchanges against Belal. I kind of feel like in this fight in particular, I wonder if Leon had just took the fight to Belal a little bit more and initiated some of those grappling exchanges, if Belal would have done so well. Because you saw that Leon was able to slip out of some of those spots, get behind Belal. I mean, he took his back for the entirety of the third round. Leon's a good grappler, and he usually fights really well in the clinch. So I wonder if he had taken a little bit more of a clinch-heavy approach, if he would have had some more success. But I don't know. We'll see. And this is going to create quite the mix-up at welterweight, because I think personally next, with how things have played out, especially with like Jack Della Maddalena getting hurt and all this stuff, right? Or getting that arm infection. I think the next guy that Belal's going to fight is going to be Shavkat. And I also think that because you're looking at this young fucking up-and-coming contender, very well-rounded, dangerous on the feet, great grappler. And if you're Dana White, just being honest and looking at how Dana's face looked when he crowned Belal, you want to give Belal somebody that you think is going to beat him. You want this guy out of there. And you could tell that he was disappointed afterwards in the press conference too, Dana White was. He was like, yeah, well, he's been training with Khabib, so he fought about how you would expect, or something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but you know that, man, Dana is not happy with Belal being the champion. So they're going to feed. And when you're the champion, you just got to fight the best of the best. But I don't feel like Belal is going to have a lot of leverage or get to call his shots very often. I think Dana White's going to be like, you're fighting this guy, until they're able to maybe Belal's the fucking best welterweight ever. Who knows? We don't know yet. But I feel like Dana's going to feed him the guys that he thinks are favorable matchups, or that the UFC finds to be favorable matchups, to get him out of that spot. Fortunately or unfortunately for Belal, he's going to have to fight a shark tank of guys, but it's just how I feel. And Leon Edwards, who does he fight next? Maybe a guy like Jack Della Maddalena, right? Do you want to fight a guy with momentum? I don't know. The Usman matchup doesn't make sense because you've already beat him twice in championship bouts. You've got Ian Gary. That could be an interesting fight, right? He's climbing up the rankings. Gilbert Burns and Sean Brady are booked up to fight September 7th. Colby Covington already beat him. Like I said, I think Shavkat will get the title shot next. Jack Della Maddalena kind of out with that arm infection. Ian Gary versus Leon Edwards might end up being the fight. And for Ian Gary, he probably likes that fight. It's the strikers match up a little bit. I don't know. That's a good fight. And then, I don't know, Shavkat jumps and fights Belal. And then what do you do with Kamaru Usman in the meantime, right? Do you have him fight a guy like Maddalena when he's ready? I don't know. Is there enough merit for Usman? Because it feels like Belal is going to has to fight somebody next, right? So I feel like Usman versus Shavkat probably doesn't make a lot of sense. And I feel like Usman will probably be willing, or a little more unwilling, to fight Shavkat after he just stepped up and fought Khamzat Chimaev at middleweight. I would think he'd want somebody, I don't know. It's going to be crazy. Welterweight's going to be, it just depends on who gets booked where and who wins what matchups, right? But we'll see. Maybe if Brady defeats Burns here in September, Usman would fight Brady if he won, and that would be enough to warrant a title shot for him against the winner of Shavkat and Belal. I don't know. Welterweight's going to get interesting. Welterweight's one of the funnest divisions right now, in my opinion. But yeah, everyone, I just wanted to make a quick stream, get this out right after the fights. Obviously, the day after would be better. But like I said, spent a lot of yesterday recording the Patty versus King Green breakdown. So if you guys are interested, check that out. Otherwise, though, I'm signing off, guys. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. If you enjoy, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, thumbs up, comment, all that good shit, and I'll catch you guys next time. Oh, I'll probably try to get a breakdown out for the fight this upcoming weekend between Corey Sandhagen and Umar Nurmagomedov on ABC. So, yeah, big fight coming up this weekend. But, yeah, I'll catch you guys later. Bye-bye.